Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Nuclear. Yes, in this series from the Asia Pacific Leadership Network, we want to hold conversations on everything nuclear with the senior members of our network. Given that the sense of nuclear risks today is deemed to be the highest it has ever been, after all, the time on the doomsday clock has been reset to 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been in the history of the clock since 1947. We want to ask senior diplomats, policymakers, practitioners what they feel about the present times. After all, nuclear tensions have run high in the past too, when they were the players. How did they navigate that space? How did nations talk to each other? Then, what lessons can they cull out for the present times? To discuss these questions, I have with me Ms. Sujata Mehta, a distinguished former ambassador of India. As a member of the Indian Foreign Service, she has held every portfolio of consequence on nuclear issues in offices within the country and abroad. She has extensive experience in UN related activities across a broad range of subjects and in different capacities. She was India's representative to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva and subsequently handled all of India's relations with the UN. Very happy to have this opportunity of talking with you, Ambassador. Welcome to Talking Nuclear.
Thank you very much, Manpreet, and thank you to the network for giving me this opportunity to address some of the experiences of the past.
So let us start by talking a little bit about the current state of global nuclear affairs. From the days when you were a young diplomat during the Cold War years, does the current nuclear landscape look particularly different to you? What are the risks that you think are the highest at this moment?
Well, looking backward, I think I'm very struck by the fact that yesterday the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, in laying out or in resetting the clock, have highlighted not just the enhanced nuclear risks, but also pointed to the trifecta, as it were, of climate change and of new and disruptive technologies coming together. I think this combination of the three is something that I find extremely troubling. When one thinks back, when I started my career, this was in 1980. The first foreign posting I went on was to Moscow in 1982. Recall what happened then. 1979 was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. 1980 were the Moscow Summer Olympics, which the West, the NATO countries, all boycotted. 1983, there was a huge popular movement, which even in retrospect was very significant. This was the Women of Greenham Common. If you remember, this was the time when US cruise missiles were going to be located at Greenham Common in the UK. And that, to my mind, was a defining feature of that time, that there was a popular upsurge of protest about weapons being placed. At that time, the trope, so to speak, was that of East-West relations. That was seen, in a sense, as the major international fault line. How would the NATO countries, led by the United States, and the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union, come to some sort of modus vivendi with each other? So that, I think, was one of the most significant ways of analyzing international politics at that time.
Well, yes, from that bipolar age, we've moved on to a situation where we've got multiple countries with nuclear weapons, and all of them are really not talking to each other at this moment in time. So it is a different moment. And amongst the risks, you've pointed out to some of the emerging technologies that are without guardrails at this moment. So do you think in the present times, the fact that there are no communication and the emerging technologies are racing ahead, is that particularly a risk that needs to be sort of taken seriously?
I do believe that very strongly. I mean, the fact is that we are not able to, I mean, perhaps specialists in artificial intelligence and in these new technologies under development can foresee more with more exactitude what is likely to happen. But certainly for people in the who are just going by what one reads, I think it is very disturbing. It is very disturbing the extent of potential applications of these technologies that one can understand is a matter of great concern. And that coupled with climate change, I mean, at this point, I'd like to shift for a moment. I mean, the issue of the salience of the Arctic to current security thinking. You know, this is something that everyone is talking about more and more. But what we're not talking about is the fact that should the increasing access to the Arctic area, whether for military purposes or for civilian purposes, for navigation, increase, there is going to be a huge disruption to the volume of water in the oceans all over the globe. And what that is going to do to sort of the maritime space, what that is going to do to people who live on coastlines, is something that we're not even thinking of.
These are the issues that we are grappling with. And I find amidst all of this, with growing insecurities, we are also seeing talk about nuclear proliferation. Countries talking about nuclear hedging, nuclear latency, once again, a terminology which had pretty much disappeared from our discourse. So, do you think the possibility of new states acquiring nuclear weapons is a challenge, once again, at a time when the NPT is as universal as it can be? And yet, nuclear non-proliferation is not a settled norm anymore.
You're absolutely right. I think it's deeply troubling that when countries start debating internally whether or not they need to exercise the option of weaponizing nuclear capability, I think that's an extremely disturbing situation because these are not decisions that can be taken lightly, that are taken lightly, but which also cannot be undone easily. So therefore, if countries feel that the only way that they can secure themselves is by developing and maintaining nuclear arsenals, I think that's a very disturbing fact. And you're right that we're now at a situation, we're now at a point in time when countries appear to be looking that way again.
May I now request you to look a little towards the back, towards the past, to help us draw some lessons from the past successes in arms control negotiations? It looks like a different era altogether. What from then should inform our approach to current challenges? I mean, how did it happen in the past that there were these two big major powers, and yet we could arrive at a situation of strategic stability with the big power dynamics? Why does it look so difficult in today's time that these negotiations are not even on the threshold anywhere?
You know, I would argue that underlying the negotiations at the time and underlying the commitments that the two sides undertook in the past was a long and a broad process of confidence building. There was a lot of effort that went into the creation of confidence alongside the recognition that a nuclear war should not be fought because no one can win. So there was the recognition of both parts of it. At this stage, we don't seem to be seeing the same sense of commitment to creating confidence. Because after all, what underlies decision making in this area is a sense of exercising sovereign choice, of needing to preserve sovereignty.
Confidence building definitely has been affected, but I there is a desire for absolute security. So that shared interest that you're talking about really has gone missing, and that does get in the way. Uh, but that's at the bilateral level. Now, drawing on your experience at the Conference on Disarmament, what explains the prolonged paralysis of multilateral disarmament negotiating forums? In fact, people are beginning to cast so much doubt on multilateralism in general. And with the CD, we have seen that it's been in this state of paralysis now for almost 2 decades. So, why is it that even at the multilateral level, we are not able to get anything going?
I'd like to respond to that at two levels. One is a crisis in multilateralism per se, which is a broader issue. And the second is that of multilateralism in the disarmament space, because that I think is a somewhat niche activity. Multilateralism in the broader sense is at this time almost hollowed out, because there is a sense that these structures that were established at the end of the Second World War, whether it is the UN and its associated specialized agencies, the whole UN system, or it is the Bretton Woods institutions, that perhaps there is something lacking in those, and that there is a need to reform multilateralism to be made more effective. I would argue that the most deficient part of the multilateral space is seen to be the maintenance of international peace and security. And the maintenance of international peace and security is the area where the UN is seen as being most ineffective. The UN is ineffective in this because the member states involved do not wish to go the way of effective UN action, because they see that as curtailing their national interests. The UN and other multilateral bodies do not have an existence apart from the existence of the member states. They can act to the extent that member states want them to act in. And that is at the heart of the crisis in international peace and security. A similar set of considerations come to play in disarmament diplomacy, exemplified most strikingly in the Conference on Disarmament. The Conference on Disarmament agenda could move forward if the member states in the conference wanted to move forward. It is because the member states themselves are unable to come to a consensus that that agenda is in a state of stasis. There are member states who are extremely dissatisfied with what is happening in the Conference on Disarmament and say that let us move outside. But the problem, to my mind, is not that it is the venue which is the issue. The problem is that the national agendas of the member states don't allow them to move forward, because they don't have the confidence at this point in time that their interests will be met in the multilateral space.
Again, I mean, countries want to be hedging rather than committing themselves to anything, which is what the Conference on Disarmament would want them to, whether even commitment to an agenda to carry things forward. Do you also think, Ambassador Mehta, that chemistry between leaders matters, or are institutional linkages more enduring? I mean, we are again finding extremely strong leaders everywhere who have rather set positions on various things. So, do you think chemistry between them is a matter that comes into play in international relations?
Most certainly. I mean, I would think that if you have complete distrust of someone, or you have total lack of respect for someone, it's very unlikely that you will make commitments of of an enduring nature. But that having been said, I mean, I don't believe that I don't believe that countries' interests are served only on the basis of how you feel about another person, how you feel about an opposite number. That can contribute, but national interests are not dependent on personal chemistry alone. I think let me put it differently. Personal chemistry can help subserve national interest, can help smoothen the way in negotiations or in finding a way forward. But I don't think it defines it. I think I would be hard pressed in the modern world to say that personal chemistry alone can determine what happens. There is the flip side. There is the flip side, and we saw that at the start of the Second World War when you had a charismatic leader leading a whole country in a direction which had an incalculably destructive effect on the world order. So we have seen the negative impact of charisma.
But now looking ahead, the biggest challenge of our times, as you have also flagged, is trust deficits, where the nations don't seem to have confidence in what is going on, whether they can believe the other side. In fact, I've always said that we seem to be in a time when countries are talking to each other through their documents. It's not as if leaders are looking eye to eye, face to face, and making some observations, but it's the documents that are making the worst case assumptions about the other side. So, in a situation like this, then how can trust in international cooperation be rebuilt when we are living in such fractious political relations?
The conundrum is should sort of trust start with small steps, or should it start with a giant leap of faith? And it's very hard to argue in favor of a giant leap of faith at a point in time when really fractious issues dominate the landscape. It is very hard to think of that, but I do believe that, as in the past, maybe we need to have some conversations at high levels which are outside the public domain, which are outside the glare of media. And quiet conversations may be one way of doing it, of restarting some conversations. Because the fact remains that one way or another, we'll have to talk in some sort of multilateral environment. I mean, I think there is an efficiency argument for multilateralism. Ultimately, when you're in a space where there are 200 countries, you need to find a place where everyone can have their say. And even if a starting point is in smaller groups, there will have to be some sort of conversations. Because not talking is not an option.
Also, quiet diplomacy, which seems to have gone out of fashion with a hyperactive media, with a very active social media, where leaders feel that if they seem weak in any form, that would sort of go against their domestic constituencies. So having some kind of a quiet diplomacy away from all of this glare, I think could be one way of getting started, as you're suggesting. Where do you see the maximum potential to turn things around? We often think about, which are the adversarial dyads, which are the most risky. But which ones do you think have a chance of turning things around in the next maybe couple of years?
Looking at the countries in terms of representing dyads doesn't quite capture the situation fully. That having been said, I think it is important that the 9 sit together and talk. And rather than at that point, any of the 9 making ideological points about whose weapon state is legal, whose is not. These are not points of principle. The point is that there are countries that have nuclear weapons. It is in everyone's interest for the nine to sit and talk openly about their particular situation, their particular concerns, so that a way forward can be found. I think that that's an important thing and the megaphones of social media and public diplomacy don't help.
Lastly, if I may ask you, how do you think the nuclear landscape will look 10 years from now? When we are in the 90th year since the atomic bombing, we've just commemorated 80 years of the time when the nuclear weapon was used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you would like to visualize what you would want and manifest itself for what it should be like in 10 years from now.
If 10 years from now we can say where we are, that wouldn't be bad. But my fear is that the destructive potential of the new technologies and the destructive potential of what climate change is going to start doing in the near term is so terrifying that along with the possible application of these technologies to the nuclear space is really what I find most worrying. So I would hope that if we can dial things down, dial things back from where we are now, that would be an ideal situation. But I just hope that things don't get worse. I also think that we need to, and this is something that I say as a citizen, that we also need to orient security policies and security analyses to the actual life situation of citizens. And I think that is something that is not thought of adequately, or that's not given adequate concern. People need to be factored in into broad strategy.
I completely agree with you. I think people have to be at the heart of everything, and that seems to have shifted away. So on that note then, where we want to bring the man and the woman to the center of policy making, we'll end this conversation here. It's been great talking to you and listening to your insights from your experience and your expertise. Thank you so much, Ambassador Mehta, for spending this time with us.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.